name on it before anyone thought to ask a second question. That was the first mistake. The first investigation had been thorough. It had also been looking in exactly the direction Dale Harwick needed it to look. What nobody had asked yet was why a woman who had built the reporting system from the ground up would leave a trail that any competent investigator could follow in 3 weeks. People who understand systems do not make elementary mistakes inside systems they designed. That question would take another 4 months to surface. And when it didn't just change the story, it reversed it entirely. And nobody had thought to ask what Dale Harwick stood to lose if they did. Dale Harwick had not come up through the company. He had been recruited aggressively, expensively from a competing regional chain by a CEO named Frank Morrow, who had staked a significant portion of his own internal credibility on the hire. Frank had fought the board for 6 months to bring Dale in at the vice presidential level. He had called in favors. He had reframed the compensation structure twice to make the package work. When the board finally approved the hire, there were people in that room who made clear they were watching. If Dale succeeded, Frank looked visionary. If Dale failed, Frank looked like a man who had spent political capital he didn't have on someone who didn't deserve it. That context did not appear anywhere in the first investigation report. It should have been the first paragraph. There was a moment, documented later in a recovered internal message, where Dale had flagged Stephen's quality rejection pattern 18 months before the evaluation opened. He had written, in plain language, that a franchisee who pushed back on approved vendor products was an operational liability. He had not written it as a concern. He had written it as a conclusion. He had known exactly who Stephen Beaumont was long before the evaluation began, and had made his decision accordingly. One quick note. This is an amazing episode, and if you'd like to get more, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're new, and your support is very much appreciated. Stay till the end, because we have a special $30 cash reward to tell you about. Now, back to the story. The civil case was 3 weeks old when a paralegal named Donna Chu made an unremarkable decision. She requested the original unmodified pipeline logs as a standard discovery baseline. It was the kind of procedural step that gets done without ceremony, because it has always been done. But for some reason, that step had been missed in this case. When those logs came back from the company's IT archive, Donna noticed something the first investigation had not been positioned to see. The modification timestamps on the restored data predated the timestamps on the original alterations, and the original alterations had come from a different hand entirely. Someone had changed the numbers first. Sheila had changed them back. Donna flagged it to the lead attorney on a Thursday afternoon with a single sentence in the subject line. The direction of the changes matters. It did. But before that finding could move forward, something else happened. The civil case was quietly reassigned. A new supervising attorney appeared on the filings, one whose firm had done significant work for Dale Harwick's previous employer. A scheduling delay pushed the discovery review back by 3 weeks. Documents that Donna had already flagged were marked as requiring additional authentication before they could be entered into the record. Sheila's attorney noticed. She filed an objection on a Wednesday morning. By Friday, the reassignment had been challenged, and a senior partner from outside the firm had been brought in to review the handling of the case. Donna Chu kept her files. She had made copies the same afternoon she sent the email. What nobody outside a small circle understood at that point was what Dale Harwick was actually protecting. What the second investigation uncovered beneath the credential fraud was something that reframed everything Dale had done. The vendor agreements he had quietly negotiated were structured around volume commitments that only made financial sense if franchise expansion proceeded on his timeline with his preferred operator in place that he knew was ambitious enough to grow fast, without asking too many questions. He had identified 7 more operators that fit the mold he needed for fastest franchisee growth. The board had never seen the vendor list. The agreements existed in a separate contracting layer that Dale had routed around standard approval channels. He had not manipulated a franchise evaluation. He had been protecting an undisclosed financial structure that the evaluation result was specifically designed to serve. The credential fraud was the surface. This was the foundation. It was about money. It seems it's always about the money. If Sheila's findings became the center of the case rather than her access credentials, the vendor agreements would surface. And if the vendor agreements surfaced, the question of who had benefited from them, and how would follow immediately behind. Dale could not afford for the direction of the investigation to reverse. He had approximately one window to ensure it didn't. Sheila understood this. She had understood it the moment she found his modification pattern in the pipeline. A man with that much structural exposure did not leave loose ends. And a contractor whose credentials were at the center of an active civil case was exactly the kind of loose end that needed to be managed before the discovery process ran its full course. She was not paranoid. She was reading the architecture of the situation, the same way she read data systems, following the logic to where it pointed. And where it pointed was toward a version of events in which her career in systems integration ended permanently. Her professional certifications became the subject of a formal misconduct review, and the civil liability expanded into territory that made future employment in any data-adjacent field functionally impossible. She had not fixed Stephen's numbers on an impulse. She had known exactly what the risk profile looked like before she touched a single file. Those 6 days between finding the fraud and deciding what to do about it were not quiet. She ran the logic forward from every angle she could find, and it returned the same answer each time. Fix the numbers and she becomes the most obvious suspect in a system she built. Don't fix them, and a man she loves loses something he earned through 3 years of refusing to compromise on the thing that made him worth believing in. She sat with that equation until it stopped feeling like a choice, and started feeling like the only thing a person who understood what was at stake could reasonably do. There was another layer to what Sheila was carrying that the investigation documents never touched. Stephen's family had not been warm toward her. The word used in polite conversation was reserved. The word used in honest conversation was resistant. The cultural differences between their families had been a quiet undercurrent from the beginning of their relationship, present in the silences at dinner tables, in the way certain questions got asked, and certain topics got steered away from, in the specific texture of the approval that was extended to her face, and withheld in the conversations she wasn't in the room for. Stephen had never dismissed it. He had also never fully confronted it. He loved his family. He loved Sheila. He had believed, with the particular optimism of a man who has never had to choose, that time would close the distance. His family's response to the civil filing was not reserved. It was immediate and it was certain. They had known something was wrong. They had said so. They had seen this coming in ways that confirmed every reservation they had ever held. His mother called twice in the same evening. His brother drove 40 minutes to deliver his opinion in person. Stephen had listened to all of it without agreeing with any of it. But the weight of it had been in the room when Sheila reached out to hold him and he stepped back. He would not have said his family's voices were the reason he stepped back, but they had been in the room, and she had felt them there. Sheila had grown up understanding that love sometimes required you to be right in ways that took longer than felt reasonable to prove. She had learned that from watching her own parents navigate a world that had not always made space for them. She did not carry bitterness about Stephen's family. She carried something quieter and more durable, the intention to outlast the narrative they had already written about her. The civil filing had very nearly made that impossible. The second investigation focused on the pipeline layer beneath the one the first investigation had examined. What it found was a modification pattern that bore none of Sheila's architectural fingerprints. She had built the reporting system. She knew exactly how it moved. What the investigators were now looking at had been built by someone who had learned the system from the outside, functional, effective, but constructed with the logic of a user rather than a builder. The modifications had been designed to ensure that Stephen Beaumont's food cost variance never cleared the franchise evaluation threshold. His 3 years of absorbing the operational cost of his own quality standards, rejecting substandard product, managing the reorder friction, holding his store to a ceiling the company's approved vendors weren't always meeting, had actually produced real improvement. Enough improvement to clear the top 3% threshold that the evaluation required. Dale Harwick had made sure that number never arrived at the corporate dashboard intact. His contractor login had been active during each modification window. Unlike the access sessions that had been routed through a VPN to cast suspicion on Stephen, Dale's sessions carried no such protection. He had not expected anyone to look one layer deeper than the access logs. He had also not expected Sheila to find what he had built and understand immediately what she was looking at. When the vendor agreements surfaced in the second investigation, exactly as Sheila had anticipated they would, the picture became complete. Dale had needed Robbie Hargrove to win the franchise evaluation cleanly and without controversy. Robbie's operational philosophy aligned with the vendor agreements. Stephen's standards did not. A franchise owner who rejected product on quality grounds was a structural problem for agreements built on volume compliance. Dale had not been manipulating an evaluation out of personal preference. He had been protecting a financial architecture he had built underneath the initiative and had never disclosed to the board. The board received the second investigation report on a Monday morning. By Thursday, Dale Harwick had resigned. The vendor agreements were flagged for a separate review. Frank Morrow did not survive the fallout cleanly. The board's post-investigation review examined his role in Dale's hiring and the degree to which his advocacy had created the conditions for unchecked access. He was not asked to resign. He was asked to accept an operational oversight committee that effectively removed his unilateral authority over executive hiring. He accepted without public comment. The people in the room when his board fight for Dale was approved understood what the committee meant without being told. By the following Tuesday, the civil filing against Sheila had been withdrawn entirely. There was one detail in the second investigation report that reframed everything. The confrontation between Sheila and Stephen, the one that had ended their engagement on the same afternoon it began, had taken place in a conference room on the third floor of the regional office building. Dale Harwick's office was down the hall. His door had been open. His assistant confirmed later that he had been present for the duration of that exchange. Sheila had known he was there. When Stephen had come to her as the internal allegations were being released, she had looked him in the eye and told him without hesitation that everything she had done was for him, for both of them. Whether he could see it yet or not. She had reached out to hold him. He had stepped back. He told her his integrity wouldn't allow him to remain in a relationship with a woman who could do what Sheila was being accused of. Then he left. What Stephen had experienced as a betrayal confirmed was something else entirely. The coldness, the deflection, the anger, the statement that she had done what was necessary to make him a better man. Every word of it had been constructed for an audience of one Dale Harwick, 30 feet down the hall, door open, listening. If Dale believed she was a scorned woman acting alone out of personal ambition, he would not look harder, he would not dig. He would accept the narrative the investigation had handed him and let it close around her without ever looking at what was underneath it. She had handed Stephen a version of her that she knew he would walk away from. She had done it deliberately, in that room, on that afternoon, because the alternative was giving Dale any reason to believe she knew exactly what she had found in his pipeline. She had protected Stephen the only way available to her at that moment. It had cost her everything she had with him. She had made that calculation and accepted the outcome before she walked into the room. Stephen did not know any of it until the attorney requested a meeting with both of them to walk through the full timeline of the second investigation. He sat across the table from Sheila for the first time in weeks. He read the section of the report that described the conference room, the open door, Dale's confirmed presence in the hallway. The investigator's conclusion was that the confrontation had been staged to insulate Stephen from becoming a secondary target, in a case that was always going to land hard on whoever was closest to the access trail. Then he read the section that described the professional exposure she had been carrying from the moment she restored his numbers, the career risk, the certification exposure, the deliberate attempt to stall the discovery process before Donachu's finding could move forward. He read the section twice. Then he set the report down and looked at her across the table for a long time without speaking. He was reconstructing something in his mind every moment of the confrontation, every word she had chosen, the specific quality of her anger and understanding for the first time that none of it had been for him to receive. It had been for Dale to hear. She had walked into that room knowing he would leave it without her. She had done it anyway. When he finally spoke, his eyes brimmed on the verge of tears. He said he should have known that the woman who had believed in him before the evaluation was announced, before the franchise existed, before he had any evidence, she was right to believe that woman did not make elementary mistakes inside a system she had built herself. Sheila looked at him steadily and told him she would make the same decision again tomorrow. He reached across the table. She let him. She took his hand. The board reconvened to address what Stephen's restored numbers actually showed. With Dale's modifications removed from the pipeline entirely, the picture was straightforward. Stephen Beaumont had cleared the evaluation threshold on the strength of his real record. 3 years of operational friction, absorbed without compromising his standards, had produced exactly the kind of improvement the franchise criteria were designed to identify. His numbers were real. They had always been real. They had simply never arrived at the corporate dashboard intact. There had originally been one franchise opportunity, one store, one shot. Dale had structured the evaluation to guarantee a specific outcome, and guaranteeing that outcome had required keeping one candidate's real performance permanently out of view. With both men's records now reflecting accurate data, the board had a different conversation than the one Dale had engineered. A second territory had already been contemplated during the first evaluation. Stephen's restored record made the answer straightforward. He signed for the second location the same week Robbie broke ground on the first. What the board also changed was the evaluation architecture. A mandatory 3-layer variance audit was added to the reporting pipeline for all future franchise reviews. The kind of discrepancy Paul Delaney had been documenting by hand on weekend mornings became an automated flag built directly into the system itself. Paul was promoted to Director of Operations 6 weeks later. Nobody announced it as a direct consequence. Nobody needed to. Sheila's name was cleared in the same press release that announced Dale Harwick's resignation. It was 3 sentences long. It did not fully account for what she had done or what it had cost her. The Sunday dinner invitation from Stephen's family did not come 3 weeks after the withdrawal. It came 4 months later, after a conversation between Stephen and his mother that he has never fully described to anyone. What Sheila received was not warmth. It was the specific absence of coldness that sometimes precedes warmth in families that move slowly and mean it when they finally move. She understood the language. She had been raised in a family that expressed love in the same careful increments. She accepted the invitation without ceremony and asked what she could do to help. It was enough. For that evening it was enough. She and Stephen did not repair things in a single conversation. That is not how emotional repair works when the damage has run in the direction this damage had run. There were weeks of distance, uncertainty in their conversations. Then there was a, "Where is this going?" conversation. Neither wanted to give up. Then they had a more emotional conversation, then another. The kind of slow emotional reconstruction that does not announce itself as progress while it is happening but becomes undeniable once enough of it has accumulated. What Stephen kept returning to was something that had happened long before any of this began. Sheila had mentioned over dinner one evening, quietly and without elaboration, that the franchise initiative was coming. She had framed it as information worth having, and given it to him, the way she gave him most things without ceremony, without asking for anything in return. He had gone to work the next morning and begun preparing for an evaluation that had not yet been announced. She had believed in him before he had any reason to believe in himself. She had believed in him enough to absorb consequences he never saw coming and never knew she was carrying. That was the thing the investigation reports and the civil filings and the timeline documents did not capture. It was also the thing that ultimately mattered more than any of the rest of it. They were married 14 months after the second investigation closed. His mother cried. Her father gave a toast that lasted 7 minutes and ended with a proverb nobody at the table had heard before, but everybody understood immediately. Eventually there were 2 new restaurants in East Texas that were opened, because 2 men built something real over 18 years, and the ground underneath it turned out to be solid. But one of those restaurants sits on ground that was nearly taken from its owner before he ever had a chance to stand on it. It exists because a woman spent 6 days running a calculation that always came out the same way, made a decision that cost her more than anyone knew, and trusted that the truth had a better chance of surviving than the version of events that had been engineered to replace it. She was right. It survived. So did they. This is the end of the episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and join our priority email notification list. We drop new episodes weekly. Plus, you'll get a monthly reward valued at $30 in cash, free as our thank you gift for becoming a part of our inner circle. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching.